Hooves pound the damp earth as a lone rider vanishes into the morning mist. He carries a secret that could save a kingdom or doom it. This was the high-stakes world of the medieval messenger, a figure who braved unimaginable perils to deliver urgent news. By the end of this story, you will know the incredible, untold methods these couriers used to connect a fractured world. We will uncover how a single piece of parchment crossed continents and why some messages were carried not on horseback, but in the mind of a runner. What do you believe was the greatest danger facing these lone riders on their vital journeys? But urgency itself was a shifting concept defined by the fears and ambitions of those in power. A royal decree announcing a new tax was important, but it could travel at the standard pace of a mounted courier. True, heart-pounding urgency was reserved for news that threatened the very fabric of the realm or promised to dramatically reshape it. A declaration of war was perhaps the most straightforward call to action, setting in motion a frantic race to mobilize armies before the enemy could. An imminent invasion required even greater speed, with messengers pushing themselves and their horses to the absolute limit to give castles and towns even a few precious days to prepare. Then there were the silent, hidden threats. A discovered plot of treason, whispered in shadowy chambers, created a different kind of emergency. The message had to be delivered with absolute secrecy, its carrier often disguised, for if the traitors learned their plan was uncovered, they would strike immediately. And from across the continent, the word of the Pope carried a unique spiritual urgency. A papal bull could excommunicate a king, launch a crusade, or settle a bitter theological dispute, and its delivery was a sacred duty that brooked no delay. The content of the scroll sealed inside that leather pouch dictated everything. It determined whether a messenger would change horses at every monastery or walk a steady mule. It decided if he would brave bandit-infested forests in the dead of night or travel openly on well-patrolled roads. The message itself was the unseen commander, issuing silent orders that shaped a perilous journey across a vast and fragmented landscape. That sealed leather pouch was not simply a container, but a fortress for words. Crafted from thick, waxed hide, it was designed to be both waterproof and tamper-proof. A royal seal of wax, often imprinted with a signet ring, secured the flap. Breaking this seal without authority was a crime punishable by death, for it was the only guarantee that the message inside had not been read or altered along the way. Yet the pouch was just one part of a carefully curated survival kit. Slung across the messenger's shoulder was a horn, an instrument of both warning and announcement. Its blast could clear a crowded bridge, alert a distant gatekeeper to open the portcullis, or signal for help in the deep, silent woods. For navigation and record-keeping, some carried a waywiser, a clever device with gears and a wheel that clicked with each rotation to measure the distance traveled. This ensured the messenger was on the correct path and provided lords with precise knowledge of their realms. A small, sharp knife was always within reach, less for combat and more as a vital tool. It could cut a stubborn strap, prepare a meager meal by the roadside, or, in a final, desperate moment, shred a sensitive document to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. And over it all, the messenger wore a heavy, hooded cloak. This was his mobile shelter, his shield against the relentless wind and driving rain that could turn a day's ride into a battle for survival. Each piece of this equipment served a single, unified purpose: to ensure that the message, against all odds, would complete its journey. That heavy cloak and sealed pouch were the uniform of a man operating under the direct authority of the crown. These royal messengers, known in Latin as nuncii regis, were the elite couriers of their age, and they moved with a power that common travelers could only dream of. When a nuntius approached a village, his arrival was not a request, it was a command. He carried a verba regis, the king's word, which gave him the absolute right to demand the best horse in the settlement. A local farmer or merchant had to surrender his finest animal on the spot, no questions asked. This was not theft, it was the law, a vital mechanism to keep urgent information flowing across the realm without delay. These men also carried writs of safe passage, documents that ordered local lords and their garrisons to provide protection and assistance. To hinder a king's messenger was to hinder the king himself, an act of defiance that could have severe consequences. This entire system of relay and privilege was not a medieval invention, it was a ghost of ancient Rome, a direct echo of the legendary cursus publicus. The Romans had built a vast, state-run relay service with way stations and fresh horses spaced a day's ride apart, allowing an imperial message to cross continents at a speed that would not be seen again for over 1,000 years. Medieval kings, ruling over fractured kingdoms with poor roads, looked back on this Roman model with envy. They attempted to recreate its efficiency on a smaller, more fragile scale. Their nuncii were a direct, if imperfect, inheritance from that classical past, a testament to the enduring need for speed and control. But what about the messages that were too sensitive, too dangerous, to be trusted to a parchment that could be lost, stolen, or broken open? Some secrets were carried in a far more secure vessel, the human mind. While royal messengers relied on the king's authority, another, more enduring network operated in silent harmony across the continent. Monasteries became the unexpected backbone of long-distance communication, their secluded walls hiding a hive of scribal activity and logistical genius. These religious houses, often spaced a day's walk apart, functioned as a continent-wide chain of way stations. A weary messenger, whether a royal nuntius or a humble pilgrim, could find food, shelter, and a fresh horse within the sanctuary of a monastery's guest house. This hospitality was not mere charity, it was a sacred duty that kept the lines of communication open. More than just inns, these monasteries were also secure repositories of knowledge. Their scriptoria, where monks painstakingly copied ancient texts, also produced and received a constant flow of letters. These missives, often written in the universal language of Latin, connected distant abbeys, reported on church affairs, and carried petitions all the way to the papal court in Rome. The monks themselves sometimes became messengers, traveling from one religious house to another on matters of doctrine or administration. Because they were men of God, they often enjoyed a unique form of safe passage, their clerical robes offering a layer of protection that an armed courier might not possess. This monastic network created a parallel information highway, one that operated with a quiet persistence that often outlasted the rise and fall of kingdoms. It was a system built not on royal command, but on faith and a shared commitment to preserving knowledge and connection across a divided world. So how fast could a royal messenger truly travel across this fractured landscape? A galloping horse is a powerful image, but it is a short burst of speed, not a sustainable pace for a journey of hundreds of miles. The reality of medieval travel was a careful, grueling calculation of endurance versus urgency. On a well-maintained Roman road in fair weather, a mounted courier pushing hard could cover perhaps 30 miles in a single day, but this was the absolute best-case scenario, demanding a fresh horse and a rider willing to ignore his own exhaustion. More often, the pace was a steady trot and walk, averaging closer to 20 miles a day once you factored in the inevitable delays. The terrain itself was the greatest variable. A messenger riding from London to York, a distance of about 200 miles, might make the trip in 10 days if the northern roads were clear, but let the autumn rains turn those tracks to deep, cloying mud, and that same journey could easily stretch to 2 weeks or more. Every river crossing was a potential bottleneck, every mountain pass a test of stamina, and then there was the human element. The messenger was not a machine. He needed to sleep, to eat, and to rest his horse. A forced march of 50 miles in a day was possible, but it would leave both man and beast broken, unable to continue for days afterward. This is why the relay system was so revolutionary. It swapped a single exhausted rider for a chain of fresh ones, turning a sprint into a marathon. Now consider a truly epic journey, like carrying a message from Paris to Rome. This was a trek of over 800 miles through the Alps and down the Italian peninsula. Even for a determined messenger using the best available routes and monastic way stations, this was a voyage of at least 6 weeks. A single storm in the mountains, a washed-out bridge, or a rumor of bandits could add another week without a second thought. The message sealed in that leather pouch was racing against time, but it was a race measured not in minutes, but in the slow, relentless turning of the seasons. While royal messengers navigated the muddy tracks of Europe, a far more perilous journey unfolded across the open sea. For island kingdoms like England, and for maintaining contact with distant outposts like the Crusader states, the fastest route was often directly across the water. A ship could carry a vital message from London to a French port in a matter of days, a journey that would take weeks by land. This maritime network was the only lifeline connecting rulers to their armies and allies in the Holy Land, but it was a thread stretched taut across a vast and unpredictable ocean. The primary vessel for this duty was the cog, a sturdy, single-masted merchant ship capable of carrying both cargo and crucial dispatches. Its captain might be handed a sealed letter with strict instructions to deliver it to the castellan of a fortress in Acre the moment he made landfall. Yet that moment was never guaranteed. The sea itself was the first and greatest adversary. A sudden squall in the English Channel or a prolonged gale in the Mediterranean could drive a ship far off course, shattering its mast and sending the king's urgent words to the bottom. Even if the ship survived, it could be blown hundreds of miles off course, turning a week-long voyage into a month-long ordeal of desperate repairs and meager rations. And then there were the wolves of the water, pirates and privateers who preyed on shipping lanes. A cog flying the colors of an English king was a prized target, its capture a strategic victory that could deprive an army of its orders or a colony of its supplies. The message itself, locked in a captain's chest, was a treasure they could ransom or use to sow disinformation. Imagine the anxiety of a clerk in London, rolling a scroll and dripping wax to seal a command, knowing it would be entrusted to such a fickle and dangerous passage. There was no demanding a fresh horse from the waves, no writ of safe passage that could calm a storm. The maritime messenger was at the complete mercy of wind, water, and human greed, making every successful delivery a minor miracle. While kings and captains relied on the slow turning of wheels and tides, another, far swifter messenger was already in the air. For centuries, the humble homing pigeon carried secrets on its wings, a living technology perfected long before the first royal messenger ever mounted a horse. These birds were not wild creatures caught for a single task. They were carefully bred and raised in dovecotes, their natural homing instinct sharpened into a reliable delivery system. The training began from the moment a squab could fly. Young pigeons were taken from their home loft on increasingly longer journeys, always being released to find their way back. This process, known as loft flying, imprinted the location of their home as the single most important place in the world. A bird might be trained to fly from a noble's country estate to his townhouse, or from a coastal fortress to a capital city dozens of miles inland. The messages they carried had to be as light as their feathers. Scribes would write a short, concise note on a tiny slip of parchment or thin paper. This was then rolled into a tight cylinder and slipped into a delicate metal capsule attached to the bird's leg. Given the limited space, These messages were often written in a form of code, using pre-arranged phrases or numbers to convey complex information like military victories, the sighting of an enemy fleet, or the death of a monarch. The primary advantage was breathtaking speed and directness, while a human messenger was slogging through muddy lanes or waiting for a favorable wind. A pigeon could fly in a straight line over any obstacle, covering up to 60 miles in a single hour. They ignored rivers, mountains, and enemy armies, their only concern the pull of the home loft, but this incredible speed came with profound limitations. The pigeon was a one-way courier. It could only ever fly to one destination, its home. This meant that for a two-way conversation, you needed two separate lofts of birds, each trained to return to the opposite location. The message itself was fixed the moment it was tied to the bird's leg. It could not be updated or expanded upon, and of course, the system was vulnerable. A sudden storm, a hungry hawk, or a keen-eyed archer in the wrong place could end the journey in an instant, the secret lost forever in the fields below. The pigeon was a brilliant, specialized tool, a feathered arrow shot across the sky, but it could never replace the adaptable, thinking mind of a human courier. But even the swiftest pigeon was useless on a moonless night or in a dense fog. For the most urgent warnings, when minutes meant the difference between safety and slaughter, medieval kingdoms relied on a system of fire and light that could shout across the hills in an instant. These were the beacon chains, a network of prepared bonfires perched on high hills and castle towers, ready to turn a single spark into a continent-spanning signal. The principle was brilliantly simple. Each fire was positioned within the line of sight of the next. When the watchman at the first station saw the glint of Spanish sails on the horizon or the dust cloud of an approaching army, he would touch a torch to his great pile of fuel. The next watchman, seeing that distant flame spring to life, would ignite his own. Like a line of falling dominoes made of fire, the warning could leap across 100 miles in a matter of minutes, a speed that no horse or bird could ever hope to match. The logistics behind this simple signal were immense. Each beacon site was a carefully maintained military installation. The fuel was not just a haphazard pile of wood. It was a specific, layered construction designed to burn hot, bright, and long. They used fast-burning brushwood to create an immediate, towering flame, supported by slower-burning logs and even coal or peat to sustain the light. Keeping this pyre dry and ready through months of rain and snow was a constant, vital chore, and it required manpower. A beacon was never left unattended. A small team of watchmen, often local men serving in rotation, lived in a hut near the summit, their lives dedicated to staring at the horizon, waiting for a spark that they prayed they would never see. Their duty was one of profound boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. For the moment they lit their fire, they were also pinpointing their own location for the approaching enemy. The most famous use of this system in England was for the Spanish Armada. From the coast of Cornwall, the first beacon flared, then the next and the next, a fiery arrow shooting inland. Within hours, the warning had reached London, long before any ship could have brought the news. The beacons were a collective, communal defense, a shared eye staring into the darkness, ensuring that no kingdom would ever be taken completely by surprise. Yet for all the speed of fire and the endurance of a horse, there were places where neither could go. Deep in the misty highlands of Scotland or the narrow, winding valleys of the Alps, a mounted rider became a liability. His horse would slip on wet scree, its hooves would bog down in peat, or the path would simply become too narrow to pass. In this world of vertical challenges and hidden trails, the most reliable messenger was not a man on horseback, but a man on foot. These were the footposts, the forgotten runners of the medieval world, and their endurance defied belief. While a horseman was bound to the roads, a footpost knew every deer track and mountain pass. He could cut straight across a swollen river at a shallow ford known only to locals, or scramble up a steep hillside that would take a rider hours to go around. Over short, brutal distances, this intimate knowledge of the land and a direct route could make his 2 legs faster than 4 hooves. His body was his only tool, a machine honed for this singular purpose. He traveled light, carrying perhaps a small satchel of provisions and a stout walking staff, but he carried the weight of the message in his mind, memorizing it to ensure its delivery even if he was robbed or his physical note was lost. The training for such a role was a lifetime in the making. These men were often shepherds or hunters, people whose daily lives involved covering immense distances on rugged ground. They knew how to read the weather in the clouds, find fresh water in a seemingly dry landscape, and move with a steady, ground-eating pace that could be maintained for hours. Imagine a dispute between 2 clans in the Scottish glens. A rider would be seen for miles, a slow and tempting target, but a lone footpost, dressed in simple wool, could move like a shadow through the heather, delivering a challenge or a truce with a speed and secrecy that no one else could match. He was the human embodiment of the land itself, a living thread connecting communities that the wider world had forgotten. That sealed wax on a parchment was far more than a decorative blob. It was a sophisticated security device, a physical lock designed to protect the integrity of the words inside. The process began with the signet ring, a piece of jewelry worn by a king, a lord, or a bishop. This ring was carved with a unique and intricate design, often a coat of arms, a mythical beast, or a personal symbol. When a scribe finished writing a letter, he would fold the parchment and pour a pool of hot wax onto the seam. Before the wax could harden, his master would press the signet ring firmly into it, leaving a clear, raised impression. This single act transformed the document. Now, anyone who received it could inspect the seal. If it was broken, cracked, or showed any sign of tampering, the message was instantly considered compromised. The penalty for breaking a royal seal without authorization was severe, often death, because it was a direct assault on the authority of the ruler. But what if the seal remained intact, but the message itself needed an extra layer of protection? For the most sensitive of communications, the words on the page were not what they seemed. Scribes employed simple but effective codes and ciphers to obscure their true meaning. A common method was substitution, where each letter of the alphabet was replaced with another according to a pre-arranged key. For example, the sender and receiver might agree to shift every letter 3 places forward, so an A becomes a D, a B becomes an E, and so on. The word army would then appear on the parchment as dupe. To anyone intercepting the message, it would look like nonsense. More complex systems used symbols instead of letters, or coded phrases where the falcon flies at dawn actually meant the attack begins on Tuesday. These ciphers were not unbreakable by modern standards, but they provided a crucial delay. A spy would need time to study the strange text and look for patterns, and in the world of medieval diplomacy and war, even a few hours of confusion for the enemy could determine the outcome of a battle or a negotiation. The sealed pouch protected the physical document, but the cipher protected the idea within, ensuring that even if the seal was broken, the secret would remain safe. Every urgent dispatch sent across the kingdom carried a hidden price tag, a steep cost that determined whose words could travel and whose would remain unheard. This entire system of royal messengers, way stations, and relay points was a massive financial undertaking, funded almost exclusively by the crown. The royal treasury bore the immense burden of maintaining this network, paying for the messengers' modest salaries, their equipment, and the stables of horses held in readiness at key castles and monasteries. Think of it as a medieval version of a state-funded infrastructure project, as vital to the realm's security as its army and its walls. The right to commandeer the best horse from any subject was, in itself, a form of indirect taxation, forcing the common people to subsidize the swift movement of the king's business. For a wealthy noble or a high-ranking bishop, access to this royal post was a privilege granted by the monarch, a tangible sign of their favor and status. They could dispatch their own letters under the king's seal, but this was a carefully controlled permission, not a public service. The common merchant, however, was almost always locked out of this official network. His urgent news about a shipment of wool or a fluctuating spice price was not a matter of state security, and he had to find other, often slower and riskier, means to communicate. This economic reality created a stark divide. The speed of information was a luxury, a tool of power reserved for the king and his most trusted allies. The vast majority of the population lived in a world where news traveled at the pace of a traveling peddler or a gossiping pilgrim, days or even weeks behind the urgent whispers that shaped their destinies from afar. That sealed pouch, heavy with royal authority, offered no protection from the dangers that waited beyond the castle walls. A messenger riding alone was a moving target, his life balanced against the perils of the open road. Highwaymen and bandits haunted the dense forests that bordered major routes, their livelihoods built on ambushing solitary travelers. To them, a royal courier was a prize, his pouch potentially holding secrets they could sell to the highest bidder or dispatches that could be ransomed back to the crown. These were not romantic outlaws, but desperate men who would think nothing of cutting a throat for the contents of a satchel. Historical records from medieval England tell of a messenger traveling from York to London who was set upon by a gang near Sherwood Forest, his horse and dispatches stolen, leaving him for dead in a ditch. He survived only by the sheer chance of a woodcutter finding him hours later, a stark reminder that the king's writ of safe passage was just a piece of parchment to a man with nothing to lose. And then there were the wolves. In the deep of winter, when hunger drove packs from the woods, the sound of howling could freeze the blood of even the most seasoned rider. A single horse, tired and lathered from a long day's ride, was a tempting meal. Messengers carried horns not just for announcement, but to blast a terrifying noise that might scatter an advancing pack, a lonely sound in the vast, dark wilderness. But the greatest adversary was often nature itself. A river that was a gentle stream in summer could become a raging, impassable torrent after a spring thaw, forcing a detour of days. A sudden blizzard in a mountain pass could erase the trail in minutes, leaving a man disoriented and freezing, his message becoming his funeral shroud. One account from the Alps describes a monk carrying a papal letter who was trapped for 3 days in a snowdrift, surviving only by huddling next to his horse for warmth until local shepherds found him, nearly dead from exposure. Every journey was a gamble against these unpredictable forces, where a twisted ankle, a lost horseshoe, or a single storm could mean the difference between a successful delivery and a disappearance that would never be explained. A royal messenger carried more than a pouch. He carried the honor and very life of his master. His role was not merely a job, it was a sworn duty, often sealed with a sacred oath before God and king. This vow transformed him from a simple courier into an extension of the monarch's own will, a bond that came with terrifying responsibilities. Breaking this oath was not a simple failure, it was a crime against the state itself. The consequences for losing a message, whether by carelessness or misfortune, were severe. A messenger who arrived at his destination without the sealed pouch could face imprisonment, the confiscation of his property, or even public flogging. His personal misfortune was irrelevant next to the strategic disaster his failure might have caused. A lost declaration of war could leave a border undefended. A misplaced tax record could cripple a royal treasury for a year. The system had no room for error, but the gravest crime was suspicion of treason. If a messenger was thought to have broken the seal and sold the contents to an enemy, or if he deliberately delayed a vital military order, the punishment was swift and brutal. He was no longer a failed servant, but a traitor. The penalty for such an act was almost always execution, a public death meant to serve as a grim warning to every other man in the king's service. This absolute accountability was the bedrock of the entire communication network. It was the fear of the gallows that ensured a messenger would brave a blizzard, fight off bandits, or swim a flooded river rather than turn back. His loyalty was the final, unbreakable lock on the leather pouch, a human safeguard that made the entire fragile system work. The ultimate test of a runner's endurance was set not in the Middle Ages, but on the dusty roads of ancient Greece. The legend of Phaedopides tells of a professional courier who ran from the battlefield of Marathon to Athens, a distance of over 20 miles, to announce a decisive victory against the Persians. Upon gasping out his message, he collapsed and died from exhaustion. While the historical accuracy of this story is debated, its power was undeniable. For medieval lords and their messengers, the tale of Phaedopides was a powerful, almost mythical archetype. It illustrated the absolute, life-or-death commitment required of the role, a standard of sacrifice that echoed through the centuries. His story was a reminder that the most urgent news could demand the ultimate price. In the medieval world, this archetype found its official counterpart in the herald. Unlike the anonymous nuntius, a herald was a public and highly visible figure, instantly recognizable by his colorful coat of arms, or tabard. Heralds were not just message carriers, they were diplomats, masters of protocol, and living symbols of truce. Their most solemn duty was to deliver declarations of war. A herald would approach an enemy city or castle, often under a flag of truce, and formally announce the grievances and intentions of his master. This was an incredibly dangerous task, as he was delivering news designed to provoke a violent response, yet his person was considered inviolable under the chivalric code. To harm a herald was a profound dishonor, a crime against the very laws of war that knights professed to uphold. He was the human channel through which the most terrible of human conflicts were formally and ceremoniously begun. Beyond the historical record, the messenger was also romanticized in the literature and song of the age. The troubadours of France and the minstrels of England sang ballads of lone riders crossing desolate moors for love or honor. In the tales of King Arthur, swift messengers are constantly appearing at Camelot to issue challenges, bring news of monsters, or summon knights to a quest. These fictional couriers were often portrayed as brave, handsome, and unfailingly loyal, their successful missions ensuring the triumph of good over evil. This romantic ideal stood in stark contrast to the muddy, dangerous, and often thankless reality of the actual job, yet it served a purpose. It embedded the figure of the faithful messenger into the cultural imagination, transforming him from a simple servant into a symbol of duty, speed, and unwavering commitment. He became a hero not of the battlefield, but of the road, a lone figure connecting the scattered pieces of a vast and mysterious world. While kings and heralds dealt in affairs of state, the news that shaped daily life for ordinary people arrived with the ring of a handbell in the market square. The town crier was the messenger for the masses, a walking bulletin board who brought every kind of announcement to the public ear. His tools were simple but effective, a loud, clear voice and a heavy brass bell whose distinctive clang would cut through the noise of the marketplace, signaling that something important was about to be shared. He did not carry a sealed pouch, for his messages were meant to be heard by all. His stage was the steps of the town cross or the guild hall, and his audience was every baker, blacksmith, and housewife within earshot. The news he delivered was the lifeblood of the community. He announced new taxes decreed by the crown, local by laws set by the town council, and the dates for upcoming fairs and markets. He proclaimed lost children, runaway apprentices, and the sale of prized livestock. He was the human conduit connecting the official world of law and commerce to the muddy reality of the street. This was how most people learned of events both great and small, from a new royal edict to a warning about a contaminated well on the edge of town. The cry of Oyez, 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 meaning hear ye, was his call to order, a demand for silence and attention from the bustling crowd. His role came with a unique form of authority: to interrupt a town crier or to spread a false rumor that contradicted his official proclamation was a punishable offense. He was the voice of the record, and his words, once spoken, became the legal truth for the town. Can you hear the echo of that bell even now? It represents the birth of public information, a system designed not for secrecy, but for shared knowledge, ensuring that everyone, from the lord in his manor to the serf in the field, was theoretically bound by the same public word. A misplaced letter or a delayed rider could rewrite the map of Europe. We find a stark example in the year 1066, when the fate of England hung not just on the point of a sword, but on the speed of a ship. King Harold Godwinson, newly crowned, faced two imminent invasions. In the north, the fearsome Viking King Harald Hardrada had landed with a massive fleet. In the south, William of Normandy was massing his own army, waiting for a favorable wind. Harold's Saxon forces were stretched thin, a classic strategic nightmare. He rushed north to meet the Viking threat at Stamford Bridge, where he won a stunning and decisive victory. But even as the battle smoke cleared, a messenger on a lathered horse brought the worst possible news. William had finally crossed the channel and landed his army on the southern coast. Harold's exhausted troops now had to force march over 200 miles back south to face a fresh, well-entrenched enemy. The communication failure was catastrophic. The warning of William's landing arrived too late for Harold to choose a different strategy. He could not rest his army or gather more men. He was forced to engage William immediately at Hastings with tired troops who had just fought a brutal battle. The result was a Saxon defeat and the complete transformation of English society under Norman rule. All because a message traveled at the speed of a single, weary horse, unable to outpace the turning tide of history. Centuries later, another doomed king fell victim to a fatal delay. In 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was a prisoner of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. For 19 years, Mary had been the focal point of Catholic plots to overthrow Elizabeth. When a final, detailed conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth was discovered, Mary's complicity was clear. Elizabeth signed her death warrant, but almost immediately regretted the decision, gripped by the moral and political implications of executing a fellow monarch. According to some accounts, she sent a second messenger racing to stay the execution, hoping to grant a last-minute reprieve, but that rider was delayed, some say deliberately, by her own advisors who feared Elizabeth would change her mind. By the time he arrived, Mary, Queen of Scots, had already been beheaded. The failed communication sealed Mary's fate and ignited a firestorm with Catholic Europe, proving that a sovereign's word was only as powerful as the horse that carried it. Perhaps the most tragic consequence of a lost message is the battle that never needed to be fought. In 1815, the final, thunderous act of the Napoleonic Wars was the Battle of New Orleans. A massive British army advanced to take the city, while American General Andrew Jackson prepared a ragged defense behind his makeshift ramparts. What neither side knew was that a peace treaty had been signed in Ghent, Belgium, 2 weeks earlier. The war was officially over, but the news traveled across the Atlantic on a slow-sailing ship. On January the 8th, the British launched a frontal assault and were cut down in rows by Jackson's riflemen, suffering over 2,000 casualties in a brutal, pointless slaughter. The victorious Americans celebrated a great victory, while the dead lay in the mud for a cause that had already ceased to exist. The silence of the empty ocean between two continents had proven more deadly than any cannon. These historical echoes remind us that the trust placed in a single messenger and the fragile chain of communication they represented was not just about speed. It was the very thread from which the tapestry of history was woven, a thread that, when snapped, could unravel kingdoms and change the world. A message carried in the mind left no trail for an enemy to intercept. This was the ultimate security for the most dangerous communications, transforming a messenger into a living, breathing scroll. These couriers were trained in the ancient art of memory, a mental discipline that turned abstract words into a vivid, unforgettable journey in their imagination. They would visualize a familiar place, like a grand palace or the path through their own village, and then place each part of their message as a striking image along that route. A warning about a traitorous baron might become a statue of the baron himself, holding a bloody dagger positioned at the mental image of the village well. A report on grain supplies could be stored as overflowing sacks of wheat piled high against the door of the blacksmith's forge. By walking this mental path in their mind's eye, the messenger could recall the entire narrative in perfect sequence, retrieving each symbolic picture and translating it back into the intended words. This method of loci or memory palace technique was not a magical gift but a skill honed through relentless practice, often starting in childhood. The risk, of course, was human fallibility. A moment of distraction, a sudden fright on the road, or simple exhaustion could scatter these carefully placed mental images. A messenger who forgot a crucial detail might be tempted to fill the gap with a logical guess, inadvertently altering the entire meaning of his dispatch. The penalty for delivering a corrupted message was as severe as for losing a sealed letter, for a king acting on faulty intelligence could make a catastrophic error. The pressure was immense, a silent burden carried every step of the journey. This invisible method of delivery was reserved for the most volatile situations where the mere existence of a written document was a threat. It was a testament to the power of the trained human mind, a hidden network of secrets that moved through the world, leaving no physical trace whatsoever. While kings and popes relied on ancient systems of command, a new kind of power was rising in the bustling cities of Europe, one built not on land or titles, but on gold and information. The merchant guilds and banking families of the late Middle Ages discovered that profit moved at the speed of a reliable messenger. A delayed letter about a ship's arrival or a shifting exchange rate could mean the difference between a fortune made and a fortune lost. This urgent need for timely news sparked a quiet revolution in communication, leading to the creation of private courier networks that would eventually outpace the royal posts. The most famous of these were operated by the Italian banking dynasties, particularly the Medici of Florence. Their commercial empire stretched from London to Constantinople, and they needed to move financial instructions, letters of credit, and market reports across this vast territory with a consistency that the king's occasional nuntius could never provide. They established their own relay of trusted agents and couriers with regular schedules and dedicated routes. A Medici messenger traveled not with a royal seal, but with a ledger book, his dispatches filled with the dry but vital details of interest rates and commodity prices. These private networks had one crucial advantage over their royal counterparts. They were built for profit, not for war. This demanded relentless efficiency. A king's messenger could commandeer a horse, but a merchant's courier had to maintain a schedule. He could not afford to alienate the locals whose cooperation he needed week after week. His success was measured not in battles won, but in the steady, predictable flow of business. The merchant posts created a parallel information highway that was often more dependable and far more frequent than the state's own system. They proved that when commerce was the driving force, the movement of words could be refined into a precise and powerful science, laying the groundwork for the public postal services we know today. The tabard of a herald was his armor, a garment so bright and distinct it could be seen across a foggy battlefield. This was no mere uniform, it was a shield woven from custom and law. While a royal messenger carried the king's word, a herald carried the king's honor, and his person was considered inviolable. To harm him was an unthinkable breach of the chivalric code, a crime against God and the very rules of war that knights swore to uphold. This sacred immunity allowed him to walk into the lion's den, to approach the gates of an enemy castle and deliver the most dangerous message of all, a declaration of war. He would announce his master's grievances with formal, rehearsed words, his voice steady even as he delivered news designed to unleash terrible violence. His role then shifted from warmonger to peacemaker, as he was often the key agent in negotiating the complex terms of a temporary truce for collecting the dead or exchanging prisoners. On the chaotic field of battle, his expertise became invaluable. The clash of armies was a tapestry of colorful coats of arms, and the herald was the master weaver who could read it. He could identify a fallen knight not by his face, which was often hidden by a helm, but by the unique heraldic symbols on his shield and surcoat. This was not just about tallying the dead, it was about ransom. A noble prisoner was a walking fortune, and the correct identification of his body or his capture had direct financial and political consequences. The herald was the living database of aristocratic lineage, a walking archive whose knowledge could save a family's fortune or secure a kingdom's treaty. He stood in the space between conflict and order, using his voice and his memory to impose a fragile structure on the chaos of men at war. That sacred immunity offered no defense against the relentless grind of the road. A messenger's body was his primary tool, and it was pushed to its absolute breaking point. Every journey was a cascade of physical punishment, starting with the simple, brutal act of staying in the saddle for 10 or 12 hours a day. The constant jolting could cause chronic back pain and spinal injuries, while the friction of the leather saddle would wear raw, open sores on the rider's inner thighs, making each new day a fresh agony. Riding accidents were a constant, terrifying possibility. A horse could stumble in a rabbit hole, spook at a sudden noise, or refuse a swollen river crossing, sending both animal and rider tumbling. A broken arm or leg, suffered in some isolated stretch of woodland, was often a death sentence. There was no one to set the bone, and infection would set in long before any help could arrive. Then there was the silent, invisible enemy of exposure. A messenger was perpetually at the mercy of the weather. Soaking rains led to chills and fevers. The bitter cold of a mountain pass could bring on frostbite, claiming fingers, toes, or even an entire foot. Breathing in the dust of a dry summer track for weeks on end could damage the lungs, leaving a courier with a persistent, racking cough for the rest of his shortened life. Their diet was another source of constant debilitation. They ate what they could find or carry, often dried meat and hard bread, with little access to fresh fruits or vegetables. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin deficiency, was a real threat on long journeys, causing gums to bleed, teeth to loosen, and old wounds to reopen. What medical care existed was crude and largely unavailable to a man stranded between towns. A local barber surgeon might stitch a wound with a needle and thread, but without any understanding of germs, the stitches themselves could introduce a fatal infection. A broken bone might be splinted, but if it healed crookedly, the messenger's career was over. For these men, a simple toothache could become a life-threatening abscess, and a case of dysentery from contaminated water could dehydrate a strong rider to a helpless state within days. The message had to get through, regardless of the trembling hands or fevered brow of the man who carried it. His personal suffering was just another calculated risk in the relentless business of moving information across a harsh and unforgiving world. That leather pouch could hide more than just official words. The trusted messenger, the man with the king's seal, was the perfect agent for gathering secrets. His legitimate travels gave him access to castle yards, army camps, and the private chambers of powerful lords. Everyone was accustomed to his presence, making him nearly invisible. Under the guise of delivering a dispatch, a messenger spy could count the number of soldiers drilling in a field, note the condition of a fortress's walls, or simply listen to the loose talk of courtiers over wine. A question about the local harvest could be a covert inquiry into food supplies for a garrison. A comment on the health of a duke might reveal the stability of his rule. This intelligence, gathered in plain sight, was often more valuable than any sealed letter he carried. To counter this silent threat, lords and kings developed their own measures of counter-espionage. One of the simplest and most effective was the use of passwords. A guard at a gate might not only demand to see the royal seal, but also require the messenger to provide a specific word or phrase, changed daily, to prove he was truly sent from the capital. Another tactic was to assign minders to visiting couriers, escorts who never left their side, ensuring they had no opportunity to wander or ask probing questions. The most dangerous game was the double agent, a messenger deliberately sent with false information, a deceptive scroll meant to mislead the enemy and provoke a fatal error. Imagine the stakes. A courier arrives at an enemy camp with a message that seems to outline a weak point in his own king's battle lines. The enemy general, taking the bait, launches an assault directly into a carefully prepared trap. The messenger who delivered that lie would have to flee for his life the moment his task was done, his cover blown forever. This shadow war turned every journey into a potential deception, where the most important message was often the one never written down. A messenger's survival often depended on being seen long before he could be heard. Across a misty field or a crowded bridge, his identity had to be instantly recognizable, a visual shout that announced his purpose and his master. This was the language of livery, a system of colors and symbols that transformed a lone rider into a moving banner. A courier in the deep blue and gold of the French king, for example, was a living piece of the crown itself. His uniform was his passport, a silent declaration that he operated under royal authority, and to hinder him was to challenge the throne. But the most crucial identifier was often a small, intricate badge pinned to his cloak or hat. This heraldic emblem, perhaps a boar or a falcon, was the personal mark of the lord he served. In a time when most people could not read, these symbols were a universal language. A guard at a distant castle gate might not know the rider's face, but he would immediately recognize the badge of his own liege lord and know to grant entry without delay. This visual coding was a matter of both efficiency and security, ensuring the right message reached the right hands. In the heightened tensions of wartime, however, a simple badge was not enough. A messenger approaching an enemy line was in mortal peril, a single arrow away from silence. For this, he needed a symbol of peace. He would carry a white flag, a stark cloth of truce held high on a staff, or if he was a herald, wear his brilliantly colored tabard, a sleeveless tunic emblazoned with his king's coat of arms. These were not just signals, they were shields woven from international custom. Under the laws of war, to attack a man under a white flag or wearing a herald's tabard was a profound dishonor, a crime against God and the chivalric code that even rival knights were bound to respect. This protection allowed the most dangerous messages, declarations of war, offers of surrender, or terms for a truce to be delivered. The visual language of livery and truce turned a vulnerable man into an inviolable representative, his body and his message safeguarded by a silent agreement understood by all. The same relentless drive that sent riders across muddy tracks and pigeons over mountains never truly vanished, it simply evolved. The medieval messenger's core mission, to deliver vital information with speed and security, became the blueprint for every communication revolution that followed. In the Renaissance, the old royal and monastic networks were transformed by banking families who needed reliable information to manage their fortunes. Their private courier services proved so efficient that they pressured governments to create something new, a public postal system. The Thurn-on-Taxis family in the Holy Roman Empire built a network that lasted for centuries, a direct descendant of the king's nuntius, but now open to anyone who could pay the fee. This was the first great shift, the democratization of speed, turning a tool of state power into an engine of commerce and personal connection. Then came the next great leap, not in Europe, but across the vast plains of North America. The Pony Express of the 1860s was a perfect echo of the medieval relay system. Young riders on fast horses would race between stations spaced 10 miles apart, swapping their exhausted mount for a fresh one in a flurry of dust and determination, just like a royal messenger commandeering a new horse in a medieval village. Their goal was the same, to shrink a vast distance through sheer human and animal endurance, carrying news that could shape the destiny of a continent. But the Pony Express was doomed to be short-lived, made obsolete not by a faster horse, but by a silent wire. The telegraph severed the ancient link between the speed of a message and the speed of a physical object. For the first time in human history, information could travel faster than a human being. The urgent warning that once took weeks to cross the ocean now arrived in minutes. The fundamental principles, however, remained unchanged. The telegraph needed its own version of way stations, relay points where the signal could be boosted. Its operators used complex codes, just like the cipher-clad scrolls of old, to condense meaning and ensure accuracy, and the security of the line was as vital as the safety of a forest road, vulnerable to interception and sabotage. This progression leads us directly to our own digital age. The Internet is the ultimate fulfillment of the medieval dream, a global network of instantaneous connection. Yet the core challenges are hauntingly familiar. Our encrypted emails and secure servers are the digital equivalents of the wax seal and the memory palace, designed to protect a message from prying eyes. The race between hackers and security experts mirrors the eternal struggle between the messenger spy and the castle guard. We have eliminated the physical delays of horse and ship, but we are still grappling with the same ancient imperatives: how to ensure that our most important words arrive quickly, intact, and seen only by the intended recipient. The medium has changed beyond recognition, but the message, and the human need behind it, echoes across 1,000 years. From the king's command to the crier's bell, the medieval world was held together by the courage of its messengers. These men were the nervous system of an entire age, their journeys a testament to a raw, human ingenuity in the face of unimaginable distance and danger. They did not simply carry letters, they carried the fate of kingdoms on their backs, navigating a landscape where every forest could hide an ambush and every river a fatal crossing. Their story is not one of a single method, but of breathtaking adaptability. It is the story of the royal nuntius demanding a fresh horse by right of the crown, the footpost moving like a ghost through the highlands, and the sailor braving the fury of the sea. It is the silent, swift flight of the homing pigeon and the fiery shout of the beacon chain leaping from hill to hill. Each method was a brilliant solution to a specific problem, a different thread in the same vital web. Their legacy is the very idea that we are connected, that information must flow, and that no mountain, forest, or ocean is too great a barrier for the human will to share a message. This relentless drive to connect and inform is a force that has shaped our world from parchment scrolls to digital packets. We would love to hear which of these incredible messenger methods captured your imagination the most. Was it the mental fortress of the memorized message, the sheer endurance of the foot runner, or the clever speed of the carrier pigeon? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.